What's up, YouTube? Siegfried True Lane, and today we're going to be going through the top 5 JRPGs on 3 of the best generations of RPG gaming. We're going to start with the Bronze Age, the Nintendo, the Silver Age, the Super Nintendo, and the Gold Age, the PlayStation 1. We're going to mention some honorable mentions. However, these are going to be the top 5 best JRPG games. Now, I do want to say, not every top one is going to be my personal favorite. I didn't go by my favorite, but by the games I feel had the biggest impact or had some of the most amazing changes, even if it's not super popular. So, do not expect the most popular JRPG game to be number one. Expect the most unique and enjoyable and strong content. With that said, I'll see you guys in just a few seconds. What's up, YouTube? Siegfried True Lane, and like I said in the opening, today we're going to be going over the top 5 JRPGs on the top 3 best generations of consoles for JRPGs. So these are going to include the Nintendo, the Super Nintendo, and the PlayStation. Now, of these 3 generations, Nintendo definitely has the weakest, but this is the console where we really got to see JRPGs begin to thrive. Now, I do know that PlayStation 2 had some, but I've always felt that the PlayStation 1, honestly, was the best era, very closely followed by PlayStation 2. With that said, we're going to go ahead and start with number 5 on the Nintendo Entertainment System. So coming at number 5 is going to be Dragon Warrior, also known as Dragon Quest. Now, the reason I have this one so low is because of the fact that it has a very convoluted system where you have to have specific commands to do everything from opening a chest to opening a door to going down the stairs. And it's very, to be perfectly honest, barbaric when it comes to a JRPG. And the combat style is kind of boring as you never see your actual character in combat, which puts this for me down to number 5. So Dragon Quest, I'll be honest, I've never actually played number 1 just because I'm not able to fully finish it. I get pretty bored. I am looking forward to trying the remakes because I think the remakes will be a better aspect. And this is definitely a game I think playing the remake will be the more enjoyable way to handle it if you did not play the original on NES. So I do look forward to getting into the Dragon Quest series with the remakes, but I don't see me doing it, especially with the original NES, as I've tried a couple times and I just get super bored. So let's go ahead and move on to number 4. So number 4 is definitely going to be Final Fantasy II. Now, if you haven't already guessed, all 3 Final Fantasies will be on this top 5 list, because Final Fantasy is definitely the king of JRPGs in the Nintendo era. So, why Final Fantasy II? Why is Final Fantasy II so low? Final Fantasy II was a very interesting game, but they really tried to implement a system that they weren't yet ready to fully implement, and it can make the game feel a little less rewarding for leveling up. The leveling up system is very convoluted, and it's quite difficult. However, this game is quite interesting with how this team works. Instead of having your constant team of 4, you now have a constant team of 3, and a guest character joins you until the very end. The one thing I didn't like about it is that the coolest character in your core team isn't on your team at the beginning. The strongest character who you want to play as, who's really cool, isn't there. But it is one of the first games to have more customization, and the actual customization of this game has a lot to be said for it. It really was something that we would see more mastered in a game like Skyrim, and I do hope to see a full-on remake of Final Fantasy II where they can implement that system in a much better way. And I'm not talking remaster. I want a full-on remake. I think every Final Fantasy game deserved the exact same remake that we saw in Final Fantasy VII. To be honest, they're amazing games, and I'm not talking about Final Fantasy's the one that they made by, I believe, Tim Ninja, which is a good game, but definitely does not. It's not Final Fantasy. It's like an alternate vision of Final Fantasy One, and so I would like to see a full, true remake with better graphics. However, I would like them to keep the JRPG style. So, anyways, Final Fantasy Two definitely deserving the top 4 spot in the Nintendo JRPGs. It plays well. It's easy to understand the combat system. It doesn't require convoluted controls, such as with Dragon Quest. I'm a really big fan of Final Fantasy II. I think it's a lot of fun. I have beaten it once. I'm going through it again on the Pixel Remastered Edition. But it definitely is one of the weaker of the series. However, I would not say it's the weakest. That's actually going to be reserved for a different Final Fantasy game. With that said, let's move on to number 3. Now, number 3, you may or may not know, because this is a Japanese exclusive, and it's called Sweet Home. If you are unfamiliar with Sweet Home at this point, then let me give you a bit of history. First of all, Sweet Home is probably one of the first true survival horror games we ever got. It is a survival horror game. It is 100% what Resident Evil is based off of. Resident Evil is all thanks to Sweet Home, which is based off an original 1980s Japanese horror movie. Now, Sweet Home is, I really enjoy Sweet Home. It does have a similar system to Dragon Quest in some ways, so I'm going to just show a little bit of it. If you've never seen the my playthroughs of this game, I'm going to go ahead and through and just explain a bit of it. So, unlike traditional JRPG games, in this game you have 5 characters. However, they can only make teams of 3. So, what you do is, as a character, you come over, and you pick who you're going to be with, right? Same with your teams. I always personally keep Kazuho with Akihiko, and with his daughter right over here, Emi. And then I always keep Takeguchi and Asuka together. Now, this game is very interesting because each character has a specific tool they can use that is going to be important to get through. For that easily, and this is, I think, where it is a little bit easier than Dragon War. Dragon War has, like, door, stairs, search, and it doesn't work well. Versus this one, where I can pick item and I just use the item I gotta use. It's very simple to know this command, right? The commands are much easier. Item, party, top, team, look, right? So, I use her item to clean up the glass. And we go and go. We're going to try and go to a first fight so that we can actually see how the fighting system is. Because the fighting system is really unique, and it's very interesting, actually. So, the first thing we're going to come here, like, okay, for example, so, look, we see what the item is, we pick it, and we move it. That's probably the more confusing one, is that when you want to pick up an item, you put item, and you click move, and you put the item into your inventory slot, right? So let's go ahead and grab this real fast. And what's interesting is this one does follow a lot of what you would consider from Resident Evil. For example, if a character dies, you lose 2 inventory slots. So you start the game off with 10 inventory slots. However, if you lose a character, you're down to 8, then 6, and actually technically more because you no longer have their tool and you have to pick up a replacement for their tool. So, for example, if Emmy dies, I no longer have her key that opens locked doors, and I have to find the lockpicks, which means I technically lose 3 slots. So it's very, very rough. If I lose Kazuho, I lose the lighter, which I need to burn the ropes, right? And there's a lot of items you're going to have to pick up. So like I said, this game is definitely very heavy survival and keeping your characters alive, right? So again, we're going to go through to a combat fight. Okay, here we go. This is where combat is really cool. Now, like Dragon Quest, the combat system is in the same similar form. However, what we can do is really cool is you can call your other team and bring them in, right? And then prayer is kind of a magic, but you're limited on that in the beginning. Although, I will be honest, when you get to the end of this game, you are so powerful. This game is extremely powerful. So now we come in, and now, unlike most Final Fantasy games, we have 5 people coming in. So we can actually have all 5 attack, right? And so, the other thing to remember is if the character dies, you pretty much lose that extra attack. So, Sweet Home. Sweet Home is a very interesting aspect. It's a JRPG mixed with survival horror. It's a really fun game. It takes about, I think, when you know what to do, it can take about an hour and a half. But unlike traditional JRPGs, this game actually implements the puzzles that we would see in games like Resident Evil. So if you like Resident Evil and you like JRPGs, this is probably one of the best games to start with. It's actually, and one thing that's weird about it, which is not normal for Nintendo RPGs of any type, is that even now it's still a pretty easy game to get into, and it's a pretty easy game to understand. So, unlike Dragon Warrior, where you had all these commands, you had to use the door to open a door, stairs to go down the stairs, Sweet Home does all of the basic stuff automatically, like we would expect from a JRPG. And if you've not played this game yet, sit down and play the game. It's a lot of fun. First time playing, it might take you 3 to 5 hours if you don't know what you're doing. But once you know how to play the game, it's just like other Resident Evil games where when you know what to do, you can beat the game in an hour and a half. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump over to number 2 in the Nintendo Entertainment System. This one not being number 1 might surprise people. However, while I love the original Final Fantasy game, I do not feel that it is a number 2 spot. I definitely feel that it is a number... I don't feel it's a number 1 spot. I feel it's a number 2 spot. Sorry, I had to sneeze and it put my mind up. So, Final Fantasy 1 is a great game. It is definitely why JRPGs became what JRPGs are. JRPGs did not follow the Dragon Quest route. They followed the Final Fantasy route, including, I believe, most Dragon Quest games now. So, Final Fantasy 1 is definitely the most important JRPG, I think, of all of the JRPGs. However, when it comes to rating it on a scale of 1 to 5, top 5, I definitely feel that this is a top 2. It's a really fun game. It's extremely enjoyable. I love playing the game. But again, I think there is one game that is above it. There's nothing that is wrong with this game. It's just that there's a game that did everything this game did, but better. So with that said, let's move to our top 1 spot. Now, I do want to say that when it comes to a top 5 list, Nintendo is definitely the easiest list to make it for. And before we go to number 1, I do want to talk about some honorable mentions, and that would be Dragon Quest 2 through 4. Now, I did not put them on the list because I've never played them, but I do know that, and the only one I played was Dragon Quest 1. But I do feel they're definitely going to be in honorable mentions, and depending on you, they might be better than Dragon Quest 1. However, since I have not played them, I do not want to throw them on the list without actually experiencing them. But I will say that of what was available for our games, Ultimas are absolutely awful, and most RPG games are really bad on the Nintendo. So this was actually probably the easiest top 5 to make, while Super Nintendo and PlayStation 1 are a bit harder, and you may or may not disagree with my list on that. However, the number 1 spot for the Nintendo JRPGs is going to be Final Fantasy III. Final Fantasy III took what Final Fantasy 1 did and made it better. You now have different jobs, you had more options, you had the crystals, you had a longer story. Final Fantasy III is one of my top 3 favorite Final Fantasy games. It's such a long story that people don't realize how long it is. And one of the Final Fantasy games that I think is one of the worst is closely tied to Final Fantasy III. So Final Fantasy III has just an amazing story where you don't know the final boss till the very end. It's not a game where you've seen the final boss. It's a game where you have no idea who that final boss is until you get to the final boss. And the whole time you're going, you're chasing, first of all, in the beginning of the game, you're not even chasing a final boss. And when you get to the second part, the second third of the game, you're facing a final boss, and you know who you're chasing, and it's not until after you beat him that you find the true final boss. If you've played Final Fantasy III before, one of the remakes, or you played Final Fantasy XIV and done the Crystal Tower raids, you will know who the final boss is. But when playing Final Fantasy III the first time, I did not know who the final boss was, and getting that final boss was freaking amazing, and I really enjoyed it. And I died until I realized I was doing it wrong. Then I had to look up how to do it correctly. Final Fantasy 3, by far the best JRPG on the Nintendo. However, like Final Fantasy 2 and I would say Final Fantasy 1, the remakes are much easier to handle, so playing the game on a remake is a little bit better. However, you can play this game on the original Nintendo and be okay. So with that said, let's say goodbye to our Nintendo games and move into the Super Nintendo genre. Before going into the Super Nintendo genre, one thing I want to say is that, first of all, I've never played the Dragon Quest games on Super Nintendo, so I cannot talk for them. So the the Dragon Quest games will not be here only because I haven't been able to play them. But I will say that they are an honorable mention right now because I am fully aware that Dragon Quest is crazy popular. I don't know if they fixed a lot of the issues. I do know it looks like they remade Dragon Quest 1 and 2 on Super Nintendo. But because I've never fully played them, I do not want to speak about them. However, the first top 5 game is going to be one that I don't think a lot of people know about, and it is one I've beaten, I think, twice. And it is a really interesting game and a really fun game, but it does still have traces of the old JRPG styles, so it's going to be number 5. And number 5 is going to be Dragon Ball Z, Legend of the Super Saiyan, or also known as Super Saiyan Densetsu. This is by far one of the more unknown JRPGs on the system. I know a lot of people don't know this game, but it is a pretty fun game. However, there are some issues with this game, is that the combat system is extremely unique and very convoluted. You're definitely not going to know how to play this game the first time without a guide. And you're definitely going to need it in English, but just like before, you do have to use the traditional talk commands, so this does still use the original commands. Which is always annoying because you also have to deal with the fact that you might have it where you're not directly where you need to be, and it'll say nobody's here. One thing that's really cool about this game is it does have the ability to fly, and you do use the actual dragon radar, if you've ever watched Dragon Ball Z, to see where you have to go. So we're going to go find Gohan, there we go. And then we can speed up, right? Now, combat. First of all, this game has way too many random encounters. Second, the combat system is extremely convoluted, but I will do my best to explain it. As you can see, each character has a specific kanji sign, right? The one for Goku is the Turtle Hermit School, and it will change middle of the game. And so if you pick a card with this, right, it's going to show his symbol. If it's a symbol, it's going to be an attack ball. The other thing is the numbers on the top. The numbers of the Dragon's Balls coincide with how powerful or the attack of the card, while the bottom of the number, I do believe, is the actual defense of the card, but in kanji. So, for example, this kanji at the bottom is a 7. I can't read this one. 2, 5, and then the Z card, right? I don't know what that one is there, to be honest. Like, that's really unreadable. These blue cards are always the super attacks. You can tell by it looks like a fire kanji almost, but at least it's a super attack. So you can then pick a super attack. So, for example, I'll do a couple combats. So that's his attack everyone. I think you can see he has that symbol. We don't have those cards. And we'll just do Light Grenade. And then everyone does have ki they can use. So, I mean, for a Nintendo era, the super attacks are kind of cool how they do it. And it is a very interesting game. However, it is old, and you got to learn the card system. And the card system is very unique and not very common. But one thing I do like about the fact is that, again, we use our Dragon Radar to see where we gotta go. Dragon Ball Legend of the Super Saiyan is a really cool game. They actually added a lot of features from the anime. However, it's probably not going to be one you're really going to be into if you haven't watched the anime. However, they do add some really cool features that I wanted to talk about. First of all, anyone who knows, who's watched the original Dragon Ball Z knows that a Saiyan, and even a hybrid Saiyan, gain more power from near death. That actually translates directly into this game. If your character gets dropped down to low HP, when you finish the battle, they will actually get a power boost. But this only works with your Saiyans and hybrid Saiyans. The Namekians and the humans don't get it. You also do get your constant team of Goku, Gohan, I do think you get Vegeta at one point, but Goku, Gohan, Krillin, Tien, Chaozu, Yamcha, and Piccolo, if one of them dies, they're gone for the game. So it does have a permanent death system in it. What is really cool is on the final battle with Frieza, if you let Krillin die, or I think any character die, but Krillin should, makes canonical sense, Goku will go Super Saiyan in the fight. He will not go Super Saiyan if you don't. But if you have a character die, Goku will go Super Saiyan. And that actually unlocks a special ending fight, which is Super Saiyan Goku versus Super Saiyan Vegeta. It's a really cool game. Has a lot of, I mean, honestly, it's closer to the anime than a lot of games we see tied to animes nowadays. If you've never had a chance to play it, getting the English hack with the English translation is really fun. It's a really fun game. It goes all the way up to the Frieza saga, and it's one I really enjoyed playing when I played through it. So definitely a solid top 5. Again, never played a Dragon Quest game, so I can't put them there. But this one I would put it in top 5. The older menu system does drop it down a bit. However, it does have a lot of cool unique systems. The card system is easy when you understand how it works. And a lot of symbols are doable without having to read Japanese. You don't need to know what each of the cards mean. You just have to know which one is your key card and which ones are your specialty cards. With that said, let's move on to number 4. So number 4 is once again a Squaresoft game. Square is the god of RPGs. Let's be honest. Most of the best RPGs, 99% of the best RPGs coming out are by Squaresoft. However, this is one that I haven't played since I was a kid. I do remember playing this game back on the original Super Nintendo, and I think I would have been around 12 or 13 years old. But it's always been one that's been in my mind, and I've never forgotten playing. And it's one that I don't think always gets a lot of attention. It is one of the forgotten JRPG series of old. And that would be Breath of Fire, which is interesting because it's a Capcom Square Enix, Squaresoft pushed together. This is before Square, so this is Squaresoft. There's no Enix yet. I really enjoyed this game when I was a kid. It's probably it is one of the first JRPGs I actually finished playing. However, I will be honest, I do not remember a lot about it. I just remember that it always stuck with me, and you have the ability to turn into dragons. And for me, I always liked turning into a dragon. I mean, that was pretty cool. And then, of course, it's always really cool that, you can actually, I'll alternate your keys here, right? That's always pretty cool, And so, let's go ahead. Game start. Now, this does carry the traditional standing here, but sometimes the volumes are different on different games. We're going to speed through this. It's been a while since I played this game, but I really enjoyed it a lot, and it is one that stuck with me for quite a while. So, let's take a look at it. So, I wanted to speed through the intro. The nice thing about Breath of Fire is that it does move into what we would consider a traditional easy JRPG versus games like Dragon Quest 1 or even Legend of the Super Saiyan. You do have this kind of weird system. So, you have abilities, attack abilities, run, stats, changing, right? So, oh, that's right. That's AB's auto battle. I forgot. AB is auto battle. I forgot this game actually had an auto battle system. Alright, so here we go. Attack, defend, menu, item, right? We have no special power. What's really cool about this one is this actually shows the HP and whatnot, so you can actually see how much HP they have. Very easy system to get into. Feels like traditional Final Fantasy at some points with the maps. However, it's really enjoyable for what it has. And sadly, it's a series that would be forgotten. So, Breath of Fire, really good game. I actually haven't played the other Breath of Fires, but it's a pretty fun game to get into. And I will say something about the Super Nintendo games is that they're new enough that you can play them without stress. A lot of the Nintendo games had a lot of issues that the Super Nintendo really ironed out, making Super Nintendo a great era of JRPGs. However, we need to now jump into number 3. And number 3, I'm going to be completely honest, is going to be extremely controversial. A lot of people are going to disagree with me on number 3, but I'm going to give reasons why I put it at number 3. So number 3 for me is going to be Chrono Trigger. I know a lot of people would want to put this at number 1, but for me, I cannot put Chrono Trigger at number 3. At number 1. It has to be a number 3 game, and there's a reason why. It's newer than a lot of the games that are going to come after it that you would rotate it with, because it could technically shift the number 2 slot, but there's a reason why I don't. For me, Chrono Trigger, it's a good game, but it's not as... I think the reason I put number 3 is it's been overhyped. It is not as good as people make it out to be. I do think, like, there are certain aspects that make it a little bit weaker, but I do think it's definitely in the top 3 games. So if you really want to make it top 2, I think it could easily go top 2, but I do not think this game would be top 1. I think that there's a game that definitely takes the top 1 spot. However, Chrono Trigger is a great game. If you've never played it, go in there and play it. I just think that there is a much better options on the Super Nintendo. However, to be fair, Super Nintendo is just packed full of great JRPGs that it's very hard to pick. I think for me, the big one is the Lavos. Lavos just isn't an enemy that carries weight. Like, there's nothing for me with Lavos, and on top of that, like, I guess the other thing is that due to the story, there's no real weight on the characters, right? Like, it's not like if the characters failed in their mission or didn't do it, it's not like it's going to affect their situation at that point. Like, it's going to affect them. So I just don't feel story-wise it's as good as the other 2 above it. The risks aren't there. And then, of course, I feel like the abilities and whatnot are much better in the next 2 games. But it's a great game, and I definitely suggest playing it through if you've never played it. And with that said, I think it's time to jump to our number 2 spot. Now, number 2 is going to be a little weird because obviously anyone who knows will know. However, this, even though it's number 2, this is my favorite on the Super Nintendo system. This came out 4 years before Chrono Trigger, which is why I bump it above Chrono Trigger, because anything Chrono Trigger really did, this game did first. And so Chrono Trigger didn't really improve. The only, I would say, improving that Chrono Trigger has are the dual text and the triple text, which are cool, but it's nothing super special for me. I'll give it, killing your main character is pretty big in Chrono Trigger, but those are probably the only 2 areas it really is big on. I think that this game, which came out 4 years earlier, is still a far superior game and is one of my favorite JRPGs. And that game is going to be Final Fantasy IV. Now, it says Final Fantasy II here, but anyone who knows the Super Nintendo era knows Final Fantasy II is actually Final Fantasy IV. So, this is definitely a game that, deserves its high praise. First game to feature actual characters, not you embodying characters or just random characters you name. Actually featured actual characters with personalities. Had your first full-on driven story, a really good story, I might add. There's a lot of emotion in this game. You have the first main villain, then you have the true main villain, right? And it pulled a Final Fantasy II where one of the cool characters you don't have on your team until, I think, about halfway through the game, but then he joins your team permanently, right? And you understand what's going on. And it's just, it's a game where you don't have 4-sided characters. Your character teams are going to be swapping, but you do keep the main character, obviously, to Cecil. And it's interesting because your main team is actually going to compose of the first 4 characters you meet in the game, and then the 5th character is the very last one you meet in the game. So, obviously Cecil, then you have Kain, Highwind, then you have Rosa, then you have Rydia, which you actually come into contact, Cecil, Kane, Rosa, Rydia. And those are going to end up being your core end characters. And then, of course, you get you're a ninja in the end, because you always gotta have a ninja in Final Fantasy. And the thing is that, while you come across other characters like Yang and the twins, Palm and Porum, and the sage Tella, you actually don't, they will move up, they will move you between your team. And you also have some pretty high emotional risks areas, like when Palm and Porum cast Petrify on themselves to prevent the wall from collapsing in with no known cure at that time of how to cure them from it. And, it's... The story between Golbez and Cecil is really good, especially when you go into the prequels of what happened with Golbez and why Golbez became who Golbez is. Fusoya is a really cool character that just explains everything. It's just a really good game. Every single character in the game has emotion tied to them. From Tella, dying because of his daughter's death. From the Bard, not knowing how to go on because he doesn't view himself as a strong fighter after, his Tella's daughter, who's his lover, dies. From Kane's jealousy of Cecil and his love for Rosa as well, which is pretty traditional. But still his loyalty, but that being, manipulated to force him to fight Cecil. To Rydia starting as a scared child and then coming back. When Rydia comes back as an adult, it is like the most epic thing ever. I mean, even for a Super Nintendo time, when you're playing it, Golbez is pretty much about to kill everybody with the Dark Dragon, and then just all of a sudden, you see another dragon appear, blows the dragon away, and then here comes Rydia, who was a tiny little girl who lost her entire village, including watching her mom die. And then all of a sudden, it's just this mature adult who is just wrecks everything. I mean, which Edge the Ninja has a super hard crush on. It's just amazing. I mean, it really is a great story. If you've never played Final Fantasy IV, go and play the game. It's an amazing game. I don't feel the prequels are that great. I've never finished the prequels. I will buy them and finish them at some point. But this is a game, I have bought so many different versions of Final Fantasy IV. I had the original Final Fantasy II on the Super Nintendo. I had Final Fantasy IV on the PlayStation. I have Final Fantasy IV on iOS. I have Final Fantasy IV on Android. I have Final Fantasy IV on PlayStation 4. I have Final Fantasy IV on Steam. I have Final Fantasy IV Pixel Remix on Final Fantasy IV. I had Final Fantasy IV on the iPad. I had Final Fantasy IV on the DS. I had Final Fantasy IV on everything possible. I love Final Fantasy IV. It is my favorite Final Fantasy game because it's the first game that I played of this caliber. However, as much as I love Final Fantasy IV, it is not the number one slot. If we're going to be talking about the number one slot on the Super Nintendo, and again, I'm going to be going by its original title, not by the title we got in North America, I'm sure everybody's already guessed it. There is only one JRPG. And this came out the exact same, I think came out a year before Chrono Trigger, or the same year of Chrono Trigger. I don't remember if Chrono Trigger was 94 or 95. But this game, everybody who knows JRPGs knows this game. This is even though it's not my favorite, probably the greatest JRPG ever released. I don't think there has ever been a JRPG that beats this one. And so, while there are plenty of great JRPGs, this one is number one. So, what is number one? Let's just get into it. And number one, if you didn't already know, is Final Fantasy VI. Look, say what you want to say. You can like other games, it's fine, but Final Fantasy VI is the best RPG of all time. Again, I personally prefer Final Fantasy IV, but Final Fantasy VI is better. It has one of the biggest twists in any Final Fantasy game. It literally switches your main character over, and the bad guy wins. And then you have to go through and just do everything. It's a long game. The amount of length it has on the Super Nintendo is amazing. It has a full has the best soundtrack of any JRPG game. I'm sorry. No JRPG game that has come out has ever surpassed Final Fantasy VI. And the fact that we've not gotten a full remake of this one, I think is criminal. I love Final Fantasy VII, but Final Fantasy VI deserves a remake first. And the only reason Final Fantasy VI is not more popular is just because JRPGs did not hit hard until the PlayStation time. Super Nintendo era, JRPGs were really in the list of JRPG fans. It wasn't a genre that reached out to people outside of that fan group. But Final Fantasy VI is amazing. And if you've never played this game, it's definitely the best game to play. So please, please play Final Fantasy VI. Get the pixel remastered version. Download the emulator and the ROM. Just play this game. This is a game that has to be played. With that said, let's move on to the next genre of consoles. Next generation of consoles. So now we're going to be getting into the golden age of JRPGs. Probably the best generation of console for JRPGs, the Sony PlayStation. Now again, I'm familiar that the PlayStation 2 has some pretty good JRPGs, but I do not feel any console outbeats the Sony PlayStation's JRPGs. It was just when JRPGs started becoming a lot more common and popular, and people started to play them. Now, it's really nice to see that they're so big nowadays, but before PlayStation, they weren't that big. So really, it is important to understand just how important the PlayStation age was when it came to the JRPGs. And before we get into it, just like we do with the Super Nintendo, we're going to go over some honorable mentions. And also kind of talk why it's not on the list. So I'm going to go alphabetical order. The first set would be the Breath of Fire 3 and 4. Again, I know that Breath of Fire 3 and the Breath of Fire 1 I really liked. I just never played 3 or 4, and I really can't put it on a list without having played it. And I don't see them having that big of an evolution in gameplay. I do believe I popped it up once, but the evolution of gameplay wasn't that high to make this list, if I remember correctly. Next, we have Dragon Quest 7, which kind of has the same issue. I just don't think it... I never played it, but I feel confident enough that it just didn't have a big enough evolution of gameplay to put it on the list and beat the ones we're going to be talking about. We also have Chrono Cross. Now, Chrono Cross had an amazing evolution when it came to gameplay, has some of the best music of any JRPG, but it does something completely unforgivable, and that is it ruins the predecessor. It ruins Chrono Trigger. The fact that it starts pretty much with ruining its prequel, or I guess you can't say prequel, the original, is a crime and should be completely considered unacceptable. And this is why it's actually probably one of the more controversial ones, where the gameplay is fun, the music is amazing, the story I feel is easy to follow but has a lot of holes, and then of course you have the fact that it just ruins Chrono Trigger. So realistically, Chrono Trigger there's no point in Chrono Trigger. Legend of Legaia, I know I played Legend of Legaia a long time ago. Again, it just doesn't stick enough for me to put it there. Lunar Silver Star Story is another one. I just feel it doesn't do enough to make the top 5 list. And then, of course, we have Wild Arms, which was pretty cool, but again, I don't feel does enough to make the list. And I think Suikoden also kind of is a JRPG, but I don't remember. Either way, I just haven't had those other ones either played them or they did enough to make me feel that they are deserving of the top 5 spots. However, let's start with the first of the top 5. So the number 5 spot is going to be... Let's see if we get here. Let's just skip this. Is going to be the one and only Final Fantasy VIII. Now, I do have a lot of issues with Final Fantasy VIII, but Final Fantasy VIII did something that's amazing, and that is the fact that it had one of the best openings of any Final Fantasy game. Let's see if we can actually get rid of that. There we go. Sorry, I had to get rid of that chat there. I'm using a different overlay for PlayStation because PlayStation just deserves it. But as you can see, this is by far, I still think, one of the best openings for any PlayStation 1 game. I mean, you got to realize this is on par with almost PlayStation 2 graphics. This, I know it came out at the end of the PlayStation lifespan, but the fact that they released something that felt almost on PlayStation 2 caliber is amazing, especially when you look at Final Fantasy IX, which didn't look nearly this good when it came to graphics. Final Fantasy VIII is, when it comes to the graphical cutscenes, is a Final Fantasy VI caliber only in cutscenes. Now, you might be wondering why, if I feel so highly about the cutscenes in this game, why would I rank it number 5 and not higher? Well, let's get into that. The problem with Final Fantasy VIII is the fact that it does a pretty carbon copy of Final Fantasy III's storyline. The music in Final Fantasy VIII is amazing. The summoning in Final Fantasy VIII, in my opinion, is the best in the game, especially if you want to cheat and have all the summons in the beginning. I mean, what's more fun than walking around being able to summon out Neo Bahamut or Zero Bahamut, or like, oh wait, no, sorry, Neo and Zero is 7. Being able to summon out Bahamut or whatnot, like, that's a lot of fun. It's really cool. Odin looks the best in Final Fantasy VIII, dude. Odin looks so cool in 8. So, although Odin looks really cool in 16, too, to be fair. It's fun. It's really fun. However, you have the fact that you have to deal with jumping to the Laguna storyline, which is... That's always killed the game for me. It's the reason I've never cleared the game, because I get to the Laguna series, and I'm like, I stop caring. I can't get through that without losing interest. So I've actually never beaten Final Fantasy VIII just because of that reason, but I do know the story, and the problem is that Ultima Cia is pretty much the same, doing the same thing as the secondary main villain in Final Fantasy III, but you don't have Dark Cloud after her as the entity pushing it, She just... So it kind of, for me, it feels like they just kind of rehashed parts from Final Fantasy III, and I'm not a big fan of that, So, gameplay amazing, music is really good. The only reason it's on here and Chrono Cross isn't is because Final Fantasy VIII did not ruin a previous entry. Final Fantasy VIII does not come in and ruin Final Fantasy VII, right? So that's why it's on the list. If Chrono Cross had not ruined Chrono Trigger, I would have Chrono Cross on this list. But Chrono Cross ruining Chrono Trigger is why it's off the list, but Final Fantasy VIII is on the list. So let's go ahead and move to the next one. So the next one for me is going to 100% be Final Fantasy IX. Now, Final Fantasy IX, I think, beats Final Fantasy VIII a bit more, mostly because of the fact that the story in 9 is a lot more unique than 8. I do like the character designs in 8 more, but Final Fantasy IX feels like it went back to the traditional roots of Final Fantasy, while 7 and 8 went to like this futuristic punk era. Whatever you call it. I know the term. Steampunk era. Final Fantasy IX felt like it went back to back to the origins of what Final Fantasy was. So I've always had a special place in my heart for Final Fantasy IX. Again, a game I've never beaten due to the fact of always having my save file get erased. But I did just buy it on Steam. I am going to go through it again. Like I said, I just beat Chrono Cross. I do plan to go through 8 and 9 and beat them. But 9 has amazing music. I love the ending theme. I love the battle theme. 9 has one of the best battle themes ever. So 9 is easily top 4. I do feel it beats Final Fantasy VIII just because Final Fantasy VIII feels like it takes too much from Final Fantasy III, and I mean, the fact that it's jumping between two different storylines too much, it kind of bothers me a bit. Also, you got Vivi. And, Zidane a Saiyan. So, come on. You got Zidane as a Saiyan. Let's be honest. He's a Saiyan. He looks like a Saiyan. He does not look like a monkey. He looks like a Saiyan. So, when I played this game as a kid, I always pretended he was a Saiyan. With that said, I hate this guy. This is probably the one thing about Final Fantasy IX that drags it down is I can't stand this knight. I always like my knight to look cool, and this guy looks like a complete doofus. So I never use him. So let's go ahead and move on to number 3. So number 3 is another game by Square Enix that should get a remake or a remaster. It's a remaster, not a remake, but a remaster. It's really good, but it needs to be redone and be remastered. And it's sad it hasn't been done. It has one of the most unique combat systems. In fact, I think this one has the most unique combat system of any of the original PlayStation RPGs. The story, I feel, gets a little confusing at times, and it just feels weird at some points. The ending felt really weird. I remember it being weird when I was growing up. But I remember the game up until the ending being a lot of fun. I just remember the ending made me feel kind of weird, and I didn't really like the ending itself. And also that I gotta wait so long to get the best character in the game, which most of the time I just use cheats to get him because I want to get him. Really cool combat system, very unique. You can see when they were trying to work with turn-based and add something in it other than just pick your attack. And so, definitely a game where you have a lot more. I think you get a lot more fun in it. And let's get into it. Number 3 is gonna be Xenogears. Xenogears, I think, is a lost gem that many people probably don't know about. But if you're a big fan of like Gundam or mechs, or even Evangelion, Xenogears is really good because it's just like a Final Fantasy but with mechs. And the combat system of doing different attacks gives you different combat moves is always really cool. As you'll see here, I do have a file here started. I did cheat, as you can see, because I wanted my combos. But this game, the fact that this game has not gotten a remaster is sad. And I hope they remaster this game because I will buy a remaster of this game. Storyline, like I said, storyline's okay. But it does have one song that I've always really liked, which is, oh my goodness, what is it called? It's Tears of, let me take a quick look here real quick. It's always like Star of Tears, right? The Star of Tears. I've always loved Star of Tears. I've always felt like Star of Tears is an amazing song, and definitely this is very deserving of the number 3 slot. So let's go ahead and move on to number 2. So number 2, I think a lot of people might argue it's number 1, but I just can't put this in number 1. It is probably the most. It is the most famous and popular JRPG of all times. But I still cannot put it in number 1, and I will explain that why in a bit. However, if you, I'm telling you it's not number 1, but a lot of people would argue it would be, you probably already know what this game is, and that is Squaresoft. Takes a while to love it. Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII is 100% one of the best JRPGs of all times. I don't feel it beats 6, personally. I feel the story in 6 is so amazing that it's hard to beat 6. But let's be real. The combat system in it is pretty fun because of, not the combat, the customization system. This game does not have a unique combat system, but it has a very unique customization system. And the customization of it is just amazing. The material system is, I think, the first time you see an actual change from, or an evolution from the Final Fantasy III and Final Fantasy V systems of specific jobs. Where instead of specific jobs, you now have the ability to put specific magic abilities on your characters, including passives. It is so much fun, and there's so much things you can do with it, like the final attack with Phoenix, where if you die, you just summon Phoenix and bring everybody back. I mean, how amazing is that? Plus, you have the whole thing with Ares, which I still remember when my older brother was playing this game, and that happened, and he threw his controller, didn't play the game for 2 weeks, because she was one of his main characters. Um, I think while other Final Fantasy games have done this, and Chrono Trigger did this, I think Final Fantasy VII does the death of a character with a lot more weight to it. And so I love Final Fantasy VII. I think it definitely deserves to be a top slot. So with that said, Final Fantasy VII, great material system, great music, everything's about as good, story's good. Let's move into our final top one slot. And if you know, you know. If you don't know, I feel bad for you. Also, I did get the remake of this final when it was cheap. I'm deciding whether or not to play it now or wait till the final part comes out. Well, let's go ahead and move on to our slot one unit. So, the number one slot on the PlayStation 1 era, if you've been around for the PlayStation RPGs and you played them, you already know what this game is. Because there's only one RPG that can be argued to beat Final Fantasy VII. And it's kind of in the same category of Chrono Trigger versus 6. I still think 4 personally is better than Chrono Trigger, but it's one of the ones where it's going to be argued, and some people might argue, for example, Chrono Trigger and 6 is 1, or Chrono Trigger is 1. This is in the same category. It's a little more unknown, like Legend of Dragoon, but I will say when they both came out, both Chrono Trigger and Legend of Dragoon were quite unknown when they released on their respective consoles. This one has amazing music, has an amazing story, pretty fun combat system. I mean, it's just amazing. The summons, I never really cared for the summons, but the attacks, the special attacks are awesome as well. So if you know, you know, and if you don't know, you should know. Sadly, this game did get remade. Well, not remade, remastered, but sadly, it will never come on any console other than PlayStation. So unless you have a PlayStation 5, you're not going to be able to play the remastered version of the game, which, I mean, I don't think is that big of a deal. Just get an emulator and enjoy it. So let's get into it. And the number one slot is Legend of Dragoon. Okay. Legend of Dragoon is, I think, on a caliber of its own, and probably the only game that I think can compete with Final Fantasy VI, in honesty. Not only did Legend of Dragoon properly do, or not properly do, but do a death probably better than Final Fantasy VII, because, yeah, 100%. Legend of Dragoon does there's a death in Legend of Dragoon, I won't ruin it, but that death is done 100% better, because you have to revisit that death in a much more important, impactful way. And storyline is great, music is great, combat system is great. It is by Sony Computer Entertainment, which means it will never come to anything but PlayStation. And there is a version on PlayStation 5. Um, it is an HD remake, but I don't think the game is that bad on PlayStation that you can't enjoy it on PlayStation. I'm sure that there are actual mods to make the original PlayStation emulators run in HD. But Legend of Dragoon, probably, definitely the most amazing RPG on PlayStation. Probably the most amazing RPG ever. It's really sad we never got a sequel to this one. Um, this is like the Bloodborne of the Souls games, where it's an amazing game. Everybody should play it, and a lot of people probably won't. It did come near the end of the PlayStation life cycle, I believe, because it's 2000. I believe the PS2 came around 2002. But this game just is amazing. I mean, and I remember the first time I beat this game. I remember watching this game get beaten. It is such a cool game. It's like, you have different you have additions for your regular attacks, and that builds up your SP mode, which you can then use to turn into a dragoon. You have attacks that might do more damage and less SP, and ones that will give you more SP and less damage. And then of course you've got the amazing one. Actual has voices, actual voice audio when you do your attacks. The Dragon Campaign cutscene is one of the best cutscenes in, I think, any PlayStation game. The Dragon Campaign cutscene beats the opening to Final Fantasy VIII. I mean, like, it's just an amazing game all the way around. So, definitely deserving of the crown of the number one game. I know a lot of people love Final Fantasy VII. I know it's way more popular, but I think Legend of Dragoon deserves the top one slot. It is just an amazing game. With that said, this is going to finish off our top 5 for each generation. You let me know, what is your favorite RPG for each of these generations? I know I didn't add Sega, but Sega didn't really have anything more than Phantasy Star on it. And then of course you have the PlayStation 2 era, which I didn't get into, the handhelds. I feel like PlayStation 1 is the golden age. I mean, like, Nintendo's the Bronze Age, SNES the Silver Age, PlayStation 1 is the golden age. You will never find better JRPGs than on the PlayStation. So if you're a big fan of JRPGs and you're just getting into it and you are still kind of young, where the PlayStation is before your time, go back and play those games. They're easy to get, they're easy to find. Go back and play them. Because I will tell you, they do not make RPGs like they used to. These RPGs did not rely on superior graphics and whatnot. They had to rely heavily on the story. And the stories are really good. I mean, even when you go back to the original Final Fantasy, that is a good story. So, with that said, I want to thank you guys if you watched this whole video. It's a long one, but when we're talking about this many games, I think we've got to take the time to do it right. Again, stick for True Lane. I plan to go through some of these games again, and I will catch you guys later. Take care of yourselves. Peace.